Hello, and welcome to the Dungeon. I'm your host, Rob. In today's video, I thought we'd do something I haven't done in a while, which used to be my bread and butter, so let's kind of get back to that a little bit. And we're going to be looking at a multi-class build, this time combining Fighter and Artificer. And one of the reasons is because I just haven't done a lot with Artificer, to be honest. Fighter, we've done a lot, but we haven't done Artificer. So, I actually think that this is a very interesting combination. One problem we often have with Fighter, especially at low levels, is that we just have no guarantee of being able to get the proper kind of weapons and armor and stuff that we want. Maybe you have a DM who works with you and they you decide that, that magic +1 short bow that you're supposed to find that nobody in the party's using, we could just actually substitute that for, say, a +1 hand crossbow that your fighter might be using with his crossbow expert feat. But if your DM isn't really the type who likes to work with you, or maybe you've got a newer DM who kind of, they're doing like a pre-written adventure and they're kind of trying to stick to the book, you might never find a magic hand crossbow. You might not be able to find a magic two-handed sword or whatever else it is you're using. Maybe you wanted a great axe, but you can only find a two-handed sword because you went half orc and you've got savage criticals or something and you wanted the extra D12 in there. One of the things with being a very specialized class, like you take the archery fighting style, you clearly want to be using ranged weapons. You took the somewhat a great weapon mastery feat, you kind of want to be using a great weapon. And if you're in a campaign where you just can't find those kind of weapons, maybe you needed a magic polearm because you took polearm master and then took sentinel, for example, and great weapon master, and you really needed that magic polearm. Being able to just infuse your own items and create weapons for yourself can be a huge boon for anybody who suffers from these kind of issues. In addition to that, certain fighter subclasses just don't have a lot to do with a bonus action necessarily, whereas the Artificer, every subclass gives you something to do with a bonus action if you wanted to take enough levels of Artificer. Now, maybe you don't want to take 3, but that's okay. The option is there. Adding spells to a fighter is always a good thing. I mean, this is kind of why Eldritch Knights are pretty good, although I probably wouldn't go Eldritch Knight in this particular combination because, I'm already getting the spells from the Artificer, right? The other good thing is that depending on what Artificer subclass you wanted to go with, you might be able to get extra attack from Artificer, meaning that if you wanted to concentrate more on spell casting and maybe get some of those really nice Artificer abilities, where Flash of Genius, for example, and giving people huge boosts on saving throws, that's an amazing ability. But if I can't get a second attack around, it just kind of hurts a little bit. But depending on what subclass I chose of Artificer, I could get an extra attack around from Artificer. But I could also just take it from Fighter and take less Artificer. And I like the fact that it's very flexible in that sense, and we can, kind of pick and choose what we want to go. Adding things like the Absorb Element spell. This is awesome on a fighter. Maybe Fairy Fire or whatever else. We could even take Shield if we went with Artillerist or Battlesmith. Really, there's just a lot to be gained here, and I like it quite a bit. It also gives us some interesting possibilities because this is one of the rare cases where we could actually start with the spellcasting class, being Artificer, and get Constitution proficiency on our saving throws. We don't have to start Fighter if we don't want to. Now, we still could, of course. Nothing wrong with that. But it does open up the possibility of taking feats like, say, Warcaster, which we couldn't do on most other half-casters because they don't have the ability to cast spells at level 1 if we were taking, say, Variant Human or, a custom lineage type of race, and then we could start with a feat, right? Now, if we add it later, it doesn't really matter so much. But starting at level 1, we might have really wanted to have Warcaster. And that's available in Artificer where it wouldn't be on, say, a Ranger or a Paladin or something along those lines. Or, obviously, when we started Fighter, again, not an option because we don't have spell casting right at first level. So adding some nice spells, obviously that's a bonus. Adding some interesting bonus actions is pretty cool. Depending on what subclass we chose, we could even be making our attacks with intelligence, which could be decent on certain fighter subclasses. Like, for example, the Arcane Archer uses intelligence on their, like, DC for a bunch of their different maneuvers, right? The Psy Warrior uses intelligence. You know, there's a few, obviously, Eldritch Knight we already mentioned, but, you know, there's like some different fighter subclasses where intelligence might actually be important, not just a dump stat. And by combining that with Artificer, suddenly, you know, that's not so bad. We don't feel like we're having to be forced to put a bunch of points into intelligence that we might not have wanted to have if suddenly we're grabbing from Artificer levels on top of that. The intelligence is actually a bonus, not a negative. Depending on what subclass of Battlemaster we took. And I would personally would really favor Battlesmith is probably my favorite. But Armor and Artillerist both have some good stuff as well. Alchemist, I feel, is probably not the best fit with Fighter. You could make it work, right? I'm not saying you can't. But it probably wouldn't be my first choice. Armor gives us some interesting possibilities, though. We can get those gauntlets where if the target attacks anybody but us, they get disadvantage. And if we kind of wanted to be that, like, tank type of role, this can help us do that, right? Also, Armor gives us the Infiltrator Armor option, which gives us range attacks, which works really well with things like, say, the archery fighting style. So I think there's some potential there. The Battlesmith, of course, is probably my first pick, though, if I'm getting an Artificer subclass at all. We might just take 2 levels. You know, that could be okay too, right? Like on the other hand, though, we could just take less fighter levels and grab ourselves Action Surge and a fighting style and, you know, a bonus action heal. You know, there's a lot that we could be grabbing there too, which is also nice, right? But like I said, the Infiltrator is pretty nice, giving us range attacks if we didn't need to be the frontline tank type of guy. And I also just really like the idea of a Battlesmith, having my pet, and taking something like, say, Echo Knight, if my campaign allows it. I can flavor it as like a hologram, which is pretty cool because I am playing an Artificer, and I just sort of like those type of roleplay things that I can throw in there. But B, just having like myself, plus my pet, plus an image of myself, all like occupying space on a battlefield, possibly getting opportunity attacks or whatever else. You know, using my pet to like impose disadvantage on enemies that are attacking different things. That just gives you a lot of battlefield control, which is something that fighters usually don't have. Like, yes, the Battle Master has some options like that. The Eldritch Knight, through the spell casting, can have those kind of options. But Eldritch Knight gains spells so slowly that they don't usually have a lot of good battlefield control options. Like, you know, they just don't. I kind of like the idea of having these, like, kind of physical presence on the battlefield. Of, you know, having myself, having my Steel Defender, having my Echo. That's just kind of neat. And it also allows me to be very mobile as well, where I can like trade places with my image and stuff like that potentially. You know, there's some cool stuff there. Battle Master, of course, is always a good option for fighter. I mean, it's kind of a staple of the fighter subclasses for a reason, you know. I also like the idea of like a Rune Knight, where, you know, I'm already like making my own cool mechanical armor type stuff, right? And then I'm like putting magical runes infused on them as well. It just sort of thematically, I like it a lot. You know, I think it fits quite well. Like I said, the Psy Warrior also uses intelligence for a bunch of their stuff. So combining that with the Artificer is pretty good as well. Really, there's quite a bit there. I also like, this is another real bonus of fighters compared to, say, like Paladin or someone like that. The fact that the fighter only needs 13 intelligence, 13 strength or dex, makes it a lot easier to multiclass in or out of. And, you know, especially if I wanted to wear some decent armor, I might want strength anyways. If I just wanted some dex, dex is good to have on pretty much any class, right? So even if I wanted to focus more on the Artificer stuff and have more intelligence, I can probably find a use for strength or dex, one or the other, right? Again, it's never going to be a wasted stat to have, either A, better armor that I can wear, or, B, just better armor class and higher initiative bonuses via dex. And, dexterity is also a pretty good saving throw to be at least decent at as well, right? It's one of the big three. We've got our wisdom, we've got our con, we've got our dex saves. Those are pretty much the most important three that are going to come up the most often. Overall, I just think that there's kind of a lot of neat synergies between these two. The other good thing about Fighter is that because it's not a spellcaster, like one problem we might have with taking, say, 3 levels of, say, Battlesmith, for example, if we were playing Wizard, right, is that is a pretty big delay in our spellcasting progression as far as getting like higher level spells. Our spell slot progression, not so much, because the Artificer is still contributing to that overall, right? But as far as the actual, accumulating of better and higher level spells, that can kind of be a big setback. But for Fighter, really, unless we're like really looking forward to getting that third attack around at 11, which, we might be, obviously that's awesome, so I don't blame you. There's really not as much there. Once we've got extra attack, we get that extra feat at level 6 that we might have wanted. Maybe we don't, it might not be important to us. But if it is, then that's a nice ability, right? But then we don't really mind adding in some other levels of something else here, because there's no real like huge delay in our progress, especially if the campaign is going to be ending around the time that we would be getting that third attack anyway. Then we might just want a bunch of levels and something else that we can use for that, longer duration, instead of getting it and then having the big boss fight and then the campaign's over. You know what I mean? Where, look, yeah, it was nice in that big boss fight. It was, to have a third attack round and maybe action surging and getting 2 attacks, kind of, essentially, right? But we could just be better for a longer period of time, which is usually a better option. So I do like the fact that it's quite flexible and there's a lot of different options, but I really like the idea of the Battlesmith with the Echo Knight and just occupying a lot of space, possibly including, a bunch of feats, like I said, like potentially Polearm Master with Sentinel, or maybe even Warcaster, so we could, make a cantrip attack or something like that as well. I think that can be a really cool ability to just take up a lot of space, make a lot of attacks, maybe like be using Polearm Mastery to get those reaction attacks as well when somebody's coming in to attack us. There's just so many options there, and I really like all of them, to be honest. So as far as actual feat choices, this is another one that's pretty open, depending on how you want to play the class. I just mentioned a couple options, like, say, Warcaster, Polearm Master, Sentinel. I think all of those go really well together if we're going to take a lot of fighter levels and we have those extra feat choices, right? Because, fighters just get more feats. That's just the way it is, right? And then, like I said, we're combining this with things like, our pet, which could potentially be imposing disadvantage, right? So between that and Polearm Master and, reaction spells like potentially shield, absorb elements and stuff, fighters don't necessarily have a lot of use for their reactions. This is going to keep our reaction pretty busy. Like, we're probably always going to have something, at least, 80% of the time, that we can do whether we want to or not, using our reaction, right? We've got some good battlefield presence. We can still be doing like really, really solid damage. We could potentially be attacking with intelligence, or we could be using strength, or we could be using dex. That gives us a lot of options for how we want to build our character and attack with. Depending on how many caster levels we wanted to take from Artificer, we could be having, we're probably not going to be a great caster, because even to begin with, we're only a half caster from Artificer. But it does give us some options where we can add things like Action Surge to that if we wanted to go that route. Or we can just add some low-level spells and potentially even some nice ritual spells at low levels to the fighter, which normally wouldn't be an option either, right? I honestly think that Artificer, I'm not going to say that it's like the best choice for fighters to dip into or anything like that, because I don't think it is. But it's definitely a really, really solid choice. The only real problem is that I'm probably going to want, 3 levels, which is a bit more of a commitment. Like that's the point where it's almost not even worthy of being called a dip anymore. Especially if your campaign is only going to like 10th or 11th level. That's a sizable commitment to that point. But you might not need a subclass. Maybe 2 levels is enough. Getting some nice infusions is really good. There's just so many things here that I really, really like. I think it's a very strong combination. I think it's one that's not really like level dependent either. Like certain combinations really shine in certain level ranges, right? But this one I think is pretty decent at low levels where we may not have magic weapon and we could make one with our infusions. Then maybe we get a magic weapon. Well, we just change that infusion out for magic armor or a magic weapon for an ally in our party, or a bag of holding, or whatever it is we decide we need at that time, right? So that gives us options, and I think at low levels it's still pretty decent, right? But it performs really well in the mid-level range, and even when we start getting to higher levels, we've either got A, a third attack around, or B, we've got better spell casting options, potentially casting a level spell, action surging, and casting another leveled spell is always great as well, or combining like all of our full complement of attacks with spells because we action surge, and it just gives us so many options. And overall, I just think it's a really, really solid combination of classes. And like I said, there's so many subclasses that are available to be used, right? Like, yes, I've already stated that I personally like the idea of a Battlesmith and an Echo Knight. But like I said, there's so many great choices. You don't even have to go Battlesmith. I think Armor and Artillerist are both pretty nice as well. Especially if we wanted to like add a bit of damage, Artillerist could be good. But just having things like, throwing out temporary hit points and stuff if we don't have a Twilight Domain cleric in the party, which we might not. There's always a chance somebody didn't want to play Twilight Domain. Maybe we're sick of it already, But just having those kind of like hit point turrets can be really, really awesome, especially if I'm a frontline fighter and, just constantly replenishing those temporary hit points round after round. Just makes me so much tankier and so much beefier. And I love it. I like the fact that I can be a frontline guy. I could be a long range guy using, archery and whatever else, right? There's just so many possibilities that it just ends up being a really, really interesting combination of classes, and you can build it in so many different ways. I really like that, you're not pigeonholed into like one specific subclass from each one and one like best way to build the class. There's so many options here. And overall, I just think it's really, really strong. So anyways, that's basically everything I wanted to say. I think it's one that doesn't really get a lot of attention. I think that overall, Artificer is kind of one of those classes where you either really like it or you just don't. The fact that it's not a full caster means that in the mid and late levels, it really doesn't keep up with things like, say, wizards and sorcerers, or even clerics and druids, to be honest. Not to mention bards. The more I think about it, the worse it starts sounding. But it's actually pretty good. I think that it's kind of one of those like strange ones where it's using intelligence. If it was using charisma, then there'd have to be so many options to multi-class with, say, like sorcerer and paladin and warlock would be like really strong with all those. Bard again, if it used wisdom, then things like ranger, druid, and cleric would be a natural fit. But because it uses intelligence, it's really just wizard, and there's already a fair amount of overlap. There's also wizard subclasses like, say, the Blade Singer, where if I wanted to be a melee guy, I could just be a Blade Singer. Now, I could go Battlesmith, Blade Singer, get the ability to attack with intelligence, and potentially still get 9th level spells, right? But that's not until level 20 in that case, which granted, if we're going to 17 to get 9th level spells, we might go to 20 probably. Chances are pretty strong in that case, right? Once we've gone that far. But, there's still the problem of like delaying things like, Wall of Force. That's a complete game changer when you first get it. And if I'm taking a bunch of Artificer levels, then I'm not getting Wall of Force as quickly. I'm not getting Force Cage. I'm not getting Contingency. I'm not getting a lot of these spells I might have really, really wanted to get at an earlier level, you know? And I think with Fighter, you just don't have those issues, you know? So overall, I think it's a really, really nice combination where we're able to add some of the stuff that Fighter's missing, or potentially add things like Action Surge and some better hit points and fighting styles that the Artificer is missing. And, you know, it ends up being a really nice combination. So anyways, that's everything I have. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave your comments in the comment section. I would love to hear about people who've actually played this combination of classes and either liked it, didn't like it, what kind of breakdown you used. Did you take more Artificer because you wanted spells and maybe you wanted like Flash of Genius? Nothing wrong with that. Maybe you took more Fighter levels because you really were like, you know what, I just want to have a Steel Defender out there and a couple Infusions, you know? Nothing wrong with that either, right? Either way, leave the comments in the comment section. I would love to hear what people have to say about this. I've never actually tried this specific combination myself personally, but I've always kind of wanted to. It's kind of one of those ones that's on the back burner, but you know how it is. You always have more ideas for characters, so we have campaigns to play characters in, or at least I always do. And half the time I'm running stuff and not being a player, so I don't really get a chance to do that. You know, just limits my options even further, but whatever. Anyways, that's everything. I'm starting to ramble again, as always. When I reach the end of these videos, it just ends up being a ramble fest. But whatever. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.